Hey guys, it's Chris from Highline Guitars, and you're watching episode 133 of From the Luthier's Workbench. In this episode, I'm going to take you on a quick tour and show off my new pedestal buffing machine that I just finished building the other day. And it's actually about 98% complete. There's a couple of other little details that I want to finish, but I had to order some parts, and so I've got to wait for those to come in. But in the meantime, I can show you the basics of how this machine was designed and built. This is actually my third buffing machine. The first one I had was a nice attempt, but it had some serious drawbacks to it. And the second one, I took a cue from the StewMac buffing machine and designed something similar, but as I started to use the machine, I quickly began to realize I was going to need to eventually modify it to make it a better machine. And that is pretty much what this machine now represents. Is I took some of the components from that second machine, repurposed them for this one so that I could keep costs down. And I incorporated a few design ideas to make it work a little bit better. So let me bring you in closer and you can see what some of those improvements are. One thing I learned about designing and building a buffing machine is that it all centers around the shaft that you use for the buffer. And ideally what you want to use is a precision ground hardened steel shaft with right hand and left hand threads on the ends to accommodate mounting the buffing wheels. And the problem is when you start to look at those kind of shafts, they get really expensive. Typically what you would have to do is buy like a 3-foot wide shaft and then take it to a machine shop to have the threads cut into it. And in doing my research, I found that a lot of the machine shops that I was talking to locally to cut threads, they really want to have a shaft that isn't hardened steel because it's so hard to cut those threads in. And what I could have done, McMaster-Carr actually sells a precision ground steel, hardened steel shaft that has the ends which aren't hardened, so you can machine them with the threads. But it still was going to end up getting fairly expensive. And as I was totaling up all the parts necessary to build the buffing machine, it was going to quickly approach the cost of buying a brand new, finished, ready to run turnkey buffing machine like the one that StewMac sells. And I was trying to keep costs to an absolute minimum. So what I ended up doing for this build was I decided to reuse the 1 1/4 inch diameter threaded steel rod that I used on my last buffer. Now the only problem with that rod is when you're using threaded steel rod like this, they are not perfectly straight. There can be a little bit of wobble in them, and that's probably as a result of threading a great long length of steel rod. But it isn't perfectly straight, and as a result, when it spins, it can wobble, especially on the ends. And when it wobbles, the machine gets really, really loud. So what I ended up doing was I moved the bearings closer to the outer ends of the shaft. And right now, the center of the bearing is 9 inches in from the end. So the shaft is 36 inches long, the center is 18 inches, and then the bearings are placed at 9 inches. So they're basically, I've sort of broken up the length of it by thirds. So what that ends up doing is it creates a great deal more stability in the shaft, so it turns much more smoothly and there isn't nearly as much wobble as what I experienced before. In fact, there's almost none. The problem with placing the bearings closer to the ends is that you can interfere with access to the buffing wheel. So what I did was I designed this machine on my computer using Rhino 3D software for the Mac, and I was able to draw it up at full scale And I was able to orient all the components to try to figure out the best way to build this machine so that I would have really good access to both buffing wheels. And since the wheels turn in this direction, I'm going to be buffing from about the middle down to the bottom. I'll never buff over up here because obviously if it's spinning this way and I'm standing in front of the buffer, you know, if I'm buffing and it's turning this way, if I'm buffing up here and it catches, it can throw the piece at me. And that can be a life-threatening injury. So by buffing from here down to here, if it catches, it's going to throw it down to the ground. It's going to destroy the piece, but at least it's not going to hit me. It's going to hit the ground. And that's just a safety consideration. But I wanted to maximize access to this area. And right now, with 12-inch wheels, I have pretty decent access here, much more access than I did before. And that's because I mounted the bearings upside down with respect to how they were mounted on my previous buffer, which was the other way around. And so I had this whole assembly was down low. Now I have it above it, and that allows me to use this sheet of plywood to mount the motor, but it also serves as a nice table where I can put my buffing compounds, and that works pretty well. The whole structure of the machine itself was made from 3 pieces of wood. I used 2 10-foot long 2x10 pine boards, and then I used a sheet of 2 foot by 2 foot by 3/4 inch thick plywood, just an exterior grade plywood mounted to the top. And I actually had to cut this down to size, and I used a piece of the scrap to make this front plate here, which serves as a place to mount my on-off switch. And it also provides a cover for the belt from the motor to the shaft, and that's just another safety feature. I've also incorporated some little 6-inch diameter plastic wheels I picked up from Harbor Freight, and that allows me to roll the machine. I just have to tilt it back and it's easy to roll around. So one of the things that I plan to add to the machine to finish it off is I'm going to put a couple of feet on the back so that I can adjust it. My floor in my shop / garage is not level. It's, you know, they always design these floors so that they have a little bit of a curve to them to let water run out. So I want to put these down there so I can level it to keep the machine really stationary, because right now it's kind of wobbly. So this is the back side of the machine showing how I positioned and mounted the motor. And the motor is a 1 horsepower Harbor Freight motor. I bought this brand new, and with a coupon it ended up being cheaper than I could find similar motors on Craigslist or eBay. And on the motor itself I have a 2-inch diameter pulley, which is driving a 4-inch diameter pulley on the shaft. And that means the shaft is going to be turning at about 900 RPM, which is, for me, the sweet spot that I like to buff at. Now the pulley that's on the shaft, because it's a 1 1/4 inch diameter shaft, it had to be custom made, but I found a guy on eBay who has a store where you can tell him what diameter pulley you want and what size shaft it's going to be fitted on, and he'll custom fabricate one, and it's really affordable. So I'm going to put links to a lot of this, the components that I use, down in the description below, so you can go check those out yourself. And it's a 4L belt, which is about 1/2 inch wide. And you'll also notice, maybe kind of hard to see, but on the ends of the shaft between the bearing and the buffing wheel, I have a length of PVC pipe. And I use that simply because it makes it easier to install the wheels and then tighten the nut so that it's pressed up against it. Before, on my previous one, I had nuts on the positioned on the inside of the shaft here, and it was just, it added weight. It was a little bit awkward, so I just cut like 4-inch lengths of 1 1/4 inch PVC pipe and slid those on, and it really works well. It's very easy, to take off the nut, and it's just a simple pipe, so kind of like a spacer, but it works pretty well. So one of the other things that I wanted to mention was I'm planning to use this motor for several different, or at least 2 different machines. One will be this buffing machine, of course, but then I also want to use it on a drum sander, which I'm currently in the process of designing that I haven't built. I've actually had 4 different drum sanders over the years, but I really like using them, so I've decided I'm going to make a new one, and I'm going to use this motor to drive it. So what I've done is I have the mounting hardware that's easy to access, and then I'm going to replace this cord with a cord that'll have a plug, and then I'll have an outlet down here that I can just plug it into and then unplug it when I want to move this motor to the other machine. And that'll work for me because I never use my buffer and my drum and a drum sander at the same time. So, and I don't even use either machine every single day. So it just makes sense for me to keep costs down by using this motor on 2 different machines. So that's kind of what I'm planning to do in the future. So that's basically the new Highline Guitars buffing machine in a nutshell. And I'm going to throw some paint on it now because I like to seal the wood. So I'll probably put some, I've got some oil-based yellow that I'm going to use. That's the same stuff I used on my CNC machine. So I'm going to make all my tools and everything color matched. So that's it for now. And I guess, have a great weekend, a great week ahead. And be sure to check the links in the description below for some of the parts and components that I used, and if you want to build your own buffing machine. So there you have it. Take care, and we'll see you soon.